The banner over my grandmother's wheelchair said, "Devoted" in gold letters. My parents stood beneath it, with their hands resting on her shoulders, smiling for the photographer they had hired for her 90th birthday. Not one of them had visited her once that year. I knew, because I was the one who cooked her dinners, drove her to appointments, and slept down the hall with one ear open in case she fell. But in those party photos, I wasn't beside her. I was in the background holding a tray. That was how they introduced me, the help. My name is Hannah Calloway. I'm 35, and I had stopped correcting people who only saw me when they needed something carried. Then Gran looked past my father's perfect smile, past my mother's pearls, and patted the old chair beside her, the one no one touched after Grandpa died. "Hannah," she said softly, "sit here." And what she said next made my father's smile disappear before the photographer could take another picture. I'm going to tell you what she said. I'm going to tell you all of it. The chair, the house, the $8,000. The afternoon a title officer turned a computer screen around and the whole room went quiet. But if you've ever been the one who stayed, who showed up every single day while the rest of the family showed up for photographs, do one small thing for me first. Subscribe so the people who need this story can find it. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I like knowing who's in the room with me. Then let me take you back, 4 years back, to the day I moved into her house. The first thing I remember about that house is the smell of cedar. It lived in the wood of an old rocking chair my grandfather built, and it had soaked into the kitchen over the years until the whole room smelled faintly of a forest in the cold. You stopped noticing it after a while, and then later, when everything else was gone, it was the thing that stayed. The thing that could put me back in that kitchen in a single breath. Every morning, I made coffee in that kitchen. 2 cups, one for me, one for Gran, with the splash of cream she pretended she didn't want. I'd set out her pills in the little blue dish, count them with my finger, and carry both cups to the table by the window. She was 90 that spring, but she still woke before I did most days. "Sit a minute," she'd say, patting the table. "The coffee can wait." So I'd sit. The mug was warm in my hands, and the morning light came in low and yellow. And she would look at the rocking chair in the corner, the way some people look at a photograph of someone they miss. We had a rhythm by then, the two of us. She'd tell me which of her stories I'd already heard, and then tell it again anyway. I'd read her the obituaries because she liked to know who'd gone, and the weather because she liked to argue with it. When her hands were bad, I buttoned her sweater. When they were good, she'd swap mine away and do it herself, slow and proud, and I learned to let her. 4 years teaches you when to help and when to step back and let a person keep what's theirs. "This old chair still knows you," she said once, and reached over and patted the armrest where the cedar had gone smooth and dark. There was a worn place on that armrest, a shallow groove the exact shape of a thumb. My grandfather's thumb. He'd put it there over 30 years of sitting and rocking and thinking, and after he died, nobody moved the chair an inch. I didn't think much in those early mornings about what the chair meant. I thought about the day ahead, her cardiologist on Tuesday, the pharmacy on Friday, the leak under the bathroom sink I kept meaning to fix. I thought about small things, because small things were what I had given up the rest of my life to do. On the refrigerator door, held by a magnet shaped like a sunflower, there was a small appointment card. I'd glanced at it 100 times without reading it. A name, a date, an address downtown. I would learn, much later, exactly what that card was for. Walt's hands were still in that wood. You should understand how my family saw me, because it explains everything that came after. My mother, Diane, called the house twice a week, and the calls were always about logistics. "Make sure the place is presentable, sweetheart. We may stop by." They never stopped by. But that spring, the calls picked up, because there were going to be photographs. A cousin I hadn't seen since a funeral came to drop off a card and found me in the kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder. "Oh," she said, looking from me to Gran and back, "are you the aide they hired?" I didn't correct her. I'd stopped correcting people. My mother answered for me anyway, breezing through the doorway with her keys still in her hand. "She's the help, basically. Aren't you, sweetheart?" She said it the way you'd say something kind. That was the worst part. She believed it was kind. Here's the thing about the word help. 4 years before that, I'd had a job in an office an hour from here, and an apartment with my name on the lease, and a future that ran in a straight line. Then Gran's hand started shaking too hard to hold a fork, and she fell once reaching for a cup, and somebody had to come. There was a family phone call about it. My father had work. My mother had the grandkids on Trevor's side. My brother had a closing. I had a future that ran in a straight line, and I gave it up, and I was the only one who raised a hand. My last paycheck, the severance from the job I left, was a little under $8,000. Gran kept trying to give it back to me, plus more, every week, folding bills into my palm like I was a teenager doing chores. I wouldn't take it. We argued about it for a month. Finally, to end it, I pressed the whole envelope into her hands. "Just hold it for me, Gran," I told her. She looked at the envelope and then at me, and something in her face settled. "Then I'll keep it for you," she said. I'd answered to worse than the help. The rocking chair came up only once that whole season, and it wasn't gentle. My father, Glenn, made one of his rare appearances. 20 minutes, coat still on, and he stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the chair like it was a stain on the floor. "We'll toss that old thing eventually," he said, falling apart anyway. It wasn't falling apart. My grandfather, Walt, had built it the winter before he got sick. Out of cedar he'd dried in the garage. He sanded that chair through 2 whole winters. He'd built things his whole life. Fences, a porch swing, a cradle for me that my mother gave away. But the chair was the last thing, and the best, and he rocked in it every evening with the radio low until the cancer took the strength out of his arms. It was the only piece of furniture he ever finished. There was a half-built one still under a sheet in the garage, frozen at the moment his hand stopped working. Gran told me once that when I was small, my grandfather let me sit in his lap in that chair and nobody else. Not Glenn, not my brother, me. "He'd have liked you in it," she said, and she put her dry, warm hand over mine on the armrest. Nobody else was allowed to touch it. That chair was the only thing he ever finished, and the only thing they'd later call junk. My brother, Trevor, was the one the family was proud of. Trevor wore good suits and worked at a title and escrow company across the river, and at every holiday, he'd lean back and explain to the room how the world really worked. He liked saying he knew his way around paperwork. I grew up in the space underneath all that, the one who was good at the quiet things. When I was a kid and Trevor brought home a trophy, it went on the wall in the front hall, in a row that's still there. When I brought home a report card, it went on the refrigerator until it slid behind the milk. I remember being 9 and spending a week building a model bridge for school, gluing it together at this very kitchen table, and my father walking past it on his way out the door and saying, "Trevor would have used a kit." Small things like that, 1,000 of them stacked up over 35 years, until you stop expecting the door to turn around. And then, one day, you're a grown woman in your grandmother's kitchen, being called the help by your own mother. And it doesn't even sting the way it should. It just confirms something you filed away a long time ago. That spring, Trevor patted my shoulder in the kitchen and looked at Gran asleep in her chair. "You're good with Grandma," he said. "Somebody's got to be." He meant it as a compliment. "I'm telling you, that's so you understand." None of them were twirling a mustache. They simply could not see me as anything but a pair of hands, and they could not see Gran as anything but a problem that would, eventually, resolve itself in their favor. Trevor always knew which papers mattered. That afternoon, Loretta from next door came over with a foil-covered dish, and she found me at the sink. "Has your dad been by?" she asked. "At all?" I didn't answer fast enough, and she read the rest off my face. Loretta had lived in the house next door for almost 40 years. She came over at least once a week with soup or with nothing, just to sit. That afternoon, she set the dish on the counter, lowered herself into the kitchen chair across from Gran, and the two of them picked up a conversation that had clearly been running since the Carter administration. I watched my grandmother laugh at something only the two of them understood, and I thought about the calendar on Loretta's kitchen wall, the paper kind where she wrote everything in pen. I marked her birthday on my calendar in pen. Loretta told me on her way out, like it was a small private fact she wanted me to have. Then, quieter. 11 months your people have stayed away. I count. Somebody should. Families who shows up. It had been 11 months since any of them, Glenn, Diane, Trevor, had walked through that door for any reason that wasn't a holiday photo. Then my phone buzzed, a text from my father. I'll swing by next week. Need to talk over a few things. After 11 months, a few things. He came on a Thursday with a folder. He set the folder on the kitchen counter. Manila, thick, a corner of paper sticking out. And then he stepped onto the back porch to take a call, sliding the glass door almost shut behind him. I was at the stove. I kept stirring. His voice came through the gap in pieces. He thought I couldn't hear him over the fan. He was wrong about that. No, she'll be fine there. It's a good facility. The spoon kept moving in my hand. Soup. I was making her soup, the kind she liked, with the little stars of pasta, and I could smell it and hear my father's voice at the same time, and the two things would not fit together in my head. Once Mom settled, we close. I stopped stirring. The kitchen kept going on around me. The fan, the soup bubbling, a bird somewhere outside. But it all went strangely far away, like I was hearing it through water. He said it the way you'd say a word about a bill. Once Mom settled, we close. My grandmother was asleep 12 feet from where my father stood on the porch, deciding the date he'd be rid of her. And I stood there with the steam rising into my face, and did not turn around, and did not say anything. When he came back in, he picked up the folder. The corner of paper slid as he lifted it, and for half a second, I saw the top line of the page underneath. 2 words, in heavy print, purchase agreement. And a header at the top, a name I didn't know yet, Harrow Ridge. Settled, like a bill, he didn't come back for his mother. He came back for the house. That night, I told Gran what I'd heard. I sat on the edge of her bed, with my hands folded between my knees, and I told her about the call and the word settled and the 2 words on the page. I expected her to be afraid. I was afraid for both of us. She wasn't. She reached over and turned on the lamp, and in the soft light, she looked at me with a steadiness that made the back of my neck prickle. I took care of some things last fall, she said. What things? She patted my hand. Tomorrow you'll meet Gail. Gran, who's Gail? I'm old Hannah. A small, dry smile. I'm not asleep. And I remembered the appointment card on the refrigerator, the one I'd glanced at 100 times. The name, the downtown address, the thing I'd never read. There's a letter too, she added, settling back against the pillows. But not yet. Who was Gail? Gail Pruitt worked out of a low brick building downtown, in an office that smelled like coffee and paper, and she talked to me like I was a smart 18-year-old who deserved the truth in plain words. She put a folder on the desk between us. Gran's folder, not Glenn's, and she opened it slowly. Your grandmother came to us last fall, Gail said. She hired this firm herself. She drove here with a neighbor, not with you. That part was on purpose, and I'll explain why in a minute. She turned a page. She did 3 things. First, she put the house into a living trust. Second, she named you the successor trustee and the sole beneficiary. Third, she revoked the power of attorney your father had been holding. I heard the words. I didn't all at once understand them. The house, and I said. It's been in a trust for you since October, Gail said. Your father just never read it. She let that sit. Then she told me the part that mattered most, and she leaned forward when she said it. Here's the thing people don't understand about a living, breathing 90-year-old with money, Gail said. The minute a family member who lives with her shows up as the beneficiary, somebody yells that the old woman was manipulated, pressured, not in her right mind. So your grandmother did this the one way nobody can unwind. She used her own lawyer, not mine through you, hers, and she met with him alone. There's a doctor's letter from the same week saying her mind was sharp, There's an independent witness who watched her sign. And you weren't in the room for any of it. On purpose. The witness, I said. Your neighbor, Loretta. Gail almost smiled. She was here the day Mr. Doyle came, signed her name twice. I thought about Loretta and her calendar, the birthdays marked in pen, the soup carried over week after week. While my own family was busy forgetting my grandmother was alive, the woman next door had been a witness, in the legal sense and every other one. The truth was already on file. Then Gail's face changed, and she set down her pen. Now, she said, tell me about this purchase agreement you mentioned. I told her what I'd seen, 2 words and a header. Gail made one phone call, then another, and 40 minutes later, she had pulled enough to draw the shape of it. She laid it out for me with her hands flat on the desk, one fact at a time, like she was setting stones in a row. My father had not been talking about a plan. My father had signed a contract. He'd signed a binding agreement to sell my grandmother's house to a developer called Harrow Ridge, with a closing date set for the 6th of May. He'd promised, in writing, to deliver clear title and an empty house by that date. And to do it, he'd signed using the power of attorney, the one Gran had killed in the fall. He had also, I would learn, borrowed against the sale before it happened, a personal bridge loan of $90,000, money already spent shoring up a brokerage that was quietly drowning. He signed under a power of attorney your grandmother already killed, Gail said, to sell a house that isn't his. Can he do that? He did do it. That's the problem he's about to have. She tapped a line near the bottom of the page, twice, with one finger. Clear title delivered by closing. She didn't say anything else about that line. She just tapped it and looked at me and let the silence finish the sentence. I sat in that brick office and tried to feel something clean. Vindication, maybe relief. And what I felt instead was a strange, cold sadness. Because there was no version of this where my father was misunderstood. He hadn't panicked and made one bad call in a hard moment. He had sat down, months ago, and decided that the simplest road through his own debt ran straight over his mother, and he had put his name to it in ink. He'd bet the house, on paper that was already dead. My grandmother had built a door. My father had just locked himself outside it and signed a contract swearing he had the key. The sale price was on the listing, $465,000. I sat in my car outside Gail's office and looked at the number on my phone and felt the cold spread out from my stomach. $465,000 for the house with the cedar chair and the groove worn by a dead man's thumb. My father had already spent money he didn't have against it. The deeper I looked, the worse his side of it got. The brokerage underwater, the loan due, a man running out of road. I called Gail back with one question. Why was he in such a hurry? Because he needs the house empty by spring, or he's ruined, she said simply, and your grandmother is the only thing standing in that house. Spring was 8 weeks away. A few days later, I passed my father's car in the driveway with the trunk open, and on top of a gym bag, there was a glossy brochure. A place called Brookhaven. Smiling gray-haired strangers on a lawn. They'd already picked the place they were going to put her. My mother brought it up gently, over tea she made in my grandmother's kitchen, like she belonged there. We've been looking at Brookhaven, Diane said, wrapping both hands around her cup. It's lovely, sweetheart. They have activities, a garden. She paused for the part she thought was the kind part. It's a little over $6,000 a month, but your father and I think it's worth it, for her. Here is what neither of us said out loud, but what I now knew, and she didn't. With the power of attorney dead and my grandmother's mind sharp as a tack, they could not move her anywhere she didn't want to go. Not to Brookhaven, not anywhere. The whole tidy plan was a house built on sand, and my mother was sitting in my grandmother's kitchen describing the garden. I held my face still. I kept the smile in the corners of my mouth where it belonged. I thought about my grandmother in the next room, who that very morning had recited a whole poem she'd memorized as a girl, just to prove to Loretta she still could. And I thought about the word activities and the smiling strangers on the brochure in the trunk of the car. And honestly, Diane went on, reaching over to pat my wrist, you've sacrificed so much, sweetheart. Let us take it from here. Some part of me, the part that was still a kid sliding a report card behind the milk, wanted my mother to mean it. She didn't mean it. She said we like she had ever once been here. Glenn wants to talk numbers with you, she added, gathering her purse. Your share. My share of a house that wasn't theirs to sell. She said we like she'd ever been here. My father slid a check across the kitchen table 2 days later. It was $8,000. He'd come alone, in a good mood, the kind of generous calm men get when they've decided they're being fair. He wanted me to sign a short waiver, giving up any claim, agreeing to move out before the sale, and in exchange, the check. $8,000, Hannah, he said, tapping it with 2 fingers. That's generous, considering. Considering what? He didn't say. Considering that I was the help, considering that he was the heir, and I was a complication that needed to vacate the property. I looked at the check for a long moment. He'd written it out in advance, in his careful broker's hand, the decimal lined up neat. He'd decided what I was worth, rounded it off, and brought it to the table like a man doing a kindness. $8,000. I'd heard that number before, in this kitchen 4 years ago, with an envelope in my hand and my grandmother's voice saying she'd keep it for me. I didn't make the connection then. It was just a number that landed wrong, that snagged on something, and I let it go by. I didn't tell him about the trust. I didn't raise my voice. I slid the check back across the table an inch and folded my hands. I'll think about it, I said. I told them I'd think about it. I wouldn't. Before we go on, I want to ask you something, because this is the exact spot I'd want to know what you'd do. If your own father slid $8,000 across the table to make you disappear quietly, before he sold the house out from under the woman you'd given up everything to care for, would you take it, or would you hold the line? Tell me in the comments. I read them. Now, back to it. They thought $8,000 bought my silence. My grandmother had already bought my future, with the same $8,000, though I didn't know it yet. After that, my father started coming by with folders. Not one folder. A rotation of them, tucked under his arm, sat on counters, opened and closed. He'd just stop in to check on Mom, and then spend 40 minutes on the back porch with his phone. My brother Trevor came too, and he had a habit that I noticed and filed away. He liked to tidy things. He'd straighten the stack of mail on the hall table. He'd flip through the folder his father left. "Just keeping the paperwork tidy, sis," he said once, catching me watching. I knew what they didn't know. I knew. That is a strange thing to carry around. I'd refill my grandmother's water and smile at my father, and inside, I'd be holding a fact so heavy it should have shown on my face. There were nights I lay awake, half convinced I'd say it in my sleep. There were mornings I rehearsed not saying it. The hardest part wasn't the silence. The hardest part was watching them be cruel to her, gently with brochures and tea and toasts, and knowing she'd already seen it coming. Already built the wall. Already decided who she trusted. I just had to hold still inside her plan and let it work. Trevor liked his paperwork tidy. Gail called to check in, and she said one thing that stayed with me. "Whatever they sign now changes nothing," she said. "But watch what they file." There was a dinner at my parents' house, the last one before the party, and it was where they tried to close the deal on me. We sat under the row of Trevor's trophies. Diane served pot roast, and between the salad and the main course, the word family got picked up and used as a tool. "We're a family, Hannah," my father said. "Families make hard decisions together. You've done your part. Nobody's saying you didn't." He said it like a man closing a deal. Warm, reasonable, already past the point of disagreement. He'd clearly thought it through. Every sentence was built to make a no sound selfish. "It's just time," Diane said. Trevor cut his meat and didn't look up. "You can't expect to live in that house forever," he said. "It was never going to be yours." The fork was heavy in my hand. My jaw ached from holding my face still. "I am family," I wanted to say. I said a version of it, quietly into the quiet. "I am family," I said. "You just bill it differently." For a second, nobody spoke. Then my father pushed back from the table to get more wine, and as he stood, he said the thing that turned the party into what it became. "We'll settle it at the birthday," he said, in front of everyone, clean. They wanted a yes. I gave them a nod. I drove home that night and called Gail, and we made a decision that wasn't a decision at all, because the math had already been done for us in a brick office downtown. We would do nothing, not nothing the way it sounds. The protections were already poured and set. The power of attorney was dead. My grandmother was lucid, which meant no one could force her out of her own home. The house was hers, inside a trust, headed to me. Every loud thing my father could do was a man pushing on a locked door from the wrong side. "We don't fight it," Gail said. "We let the calendar do it. The law's already on her side." So I marked the calendar in my own kitchen. The party in late March. And the closing, my father's hard deadline, the day his whole bet came due, circled in May. The 6th. 2 dates, weeks apart, racing each other, and only one of them had the truth on its side. That week, my father called Harrow Ridge so many times I lost count. I'd see him on the porch, phone to his ear, jabbing at the screen between calls like it owed him something. Everyone was counting down to the 6th. Only I knew what that day actually held. A week before the party, my grandmother asked me to sit in the rocking chair. It was late afternoon, the cedar smell thick in the warm light, and she'd had me move her wheelchair close to it. On her lap was a sealed envelope. "I want you to take something on," she said. "Gail's calling it being the successor trustee. It's a fancy way of saying that when I'm gone, you're the one who decides what happens to this house. I want it to be you." I didn't answer right away. I should have just said yes. But the kid in me, the one who'd spent 35 years waiting for a family to turn around, said something smaller. "I keep thinking they'll come around," I said. If I do enough, if I don't make trouble, maybe—" "They won't, sweetheart." She said it without cruelty, which was worse. I love my son. I carried him, and I have watched him for 60 years choose the easy thing over the right one, and I am not going to pretend, on my way out, that I never saw it. She let that settle. "You, I never had to wonder about. You just came." Then she held out the envelope. On the front, in her careful hand, it said, "For Hannah. What I kept." "Don't open it until you have to," she said. "You'll know when." I took the envelope. The paper was rough under my thumb. "You stayed," my grandmother said. "That's all the proof I ever needed." She chose me in ink, not at a party. The next morning, alone in the house, I sat down in my grandfather's chair for the first time in my life. I don't know why that was the morning. Gran was asleep down the hall. The acceptance papers Gail had left were on the kitchen table with a pen. And the chair was right there, the cedar gone smooth and dark, the groove worn by a thumb that wasn't there anymore. I lowered myself into it slowly, like the wood might object. It didn't. It held me the way it had held him. And the thing I'd been carrying since the day at the stove came up all at once, and I let myself cry. Once. With my hand pressed flat on the armrest, over the worn place, fitting my own thumb into the groove that wasn't mine, and wasn't his anymore either. Then I wiped my face, and I went to the table and I signed. "Okay, Walt," I said to the empty kitchen. "Okay, Gran." The sealed envelope sat beside the papers still closed. For Hannah, what I kept. I signed it in his chair and let myself cry. Once. Some of what happened that month I only learned later, from Gail, sitting in the same brick office after it was all over. While I was signing papers in my grandfather's chair, my father was on the phone begging Harrow Ridge for an extension and getting none. The developer's lawyers were tightening, not loosening. And when my father went looking for my grandmother's estate documents, the trust, the terms, the thing that would have told him everything, he hit a wall. The firm wouldn't release them to him because the client wasn't him. He was so certain he was the heir that it never occurred to him to ask who actually was. And my brother, Trevor, that quiet, tidy man, he had started getting an idea. The kind of idea a man gets when his father's ruin is also his own, when he's co-signed things he shouldn't have, when he works somewhere with a notary stamp and a sense that paperwork is just a story you tell, convincingly enough. He hadn't put it on paper yet. He would. He was already drowning. He just smiled at parties. I committed in private. They were about to perform in public. The party had a chocolate fountain. I want you to picture it the way the guests saw it. A rented backyard tent. White cloths. 30 people who hadn't called my grandmother in years, holding small plates. The banner over her wheelchair, devoted in gold, ordered online and hung that morning by a man on a ladder. And a photographer my parents had paid, moving people into position, telling everyone to come in close. I was carrying a tray of punch. I'd been up since 5 getting the house ready for people who'd never set foot in it. I'd done her hair the way she liked it. I'd ironed the blouse she chose. And then the relatives arrived, and the photographer arrived, and I became furniture. Useful furniture, the kind you ask to fetch things. A woman I half recognized caught my elbow. "Oh, she's the help, aren't you, dear? Could you get more napkins?" My mother, nearby, smiled and didn't correct her, and I went and got the napkins. And somewhere in there, a camera flashed and caught me in the background of a photo captioned, later, with the word family. Loretta was there, in her good cardigan. She looked at the banner and then at the photographer, arranging my parents' hands on my grandmother's shoulders, and she gave a small shake of her head, meant only for me. Devoted in gold, 11 months too late. Then my father stood up and tapped a glass. He wanted to make a toast, he said. He wanted to settle something in front of everyone with love. He had the room. He had the smile from the photographs. "Mom's 90, he said, warm, expansive, and taking care of someone her age is a lot. So Diane and we found her somewhere she'll be properly cared for. A wonderful place. It's time." There was a soft, approving murmur. Someone said how lucky she was. The photographer raised his camera. My father lifted his glass toward my grandmother like she had already left the room. He toasted her like she'd already gone. And my grandmother, in her wheelchair, set her own glass down on the table with a small, deliberate click. She looked past my father's perfect smile, past my mother's pearls. She reached over and patted the seat of the rocking chair beside her. My grandfather's chair, the one no one had touched in years, the one she'd insisted they wheel out to the tent. "Hannah," she said softly, "sit here, right here." The tent went quiet in pieces, the way a room does when it doesn't yet know why. I set down the tray. I crossed the grass. I sat in the chair beside her, and she took my hand, and then she spoke to the room in a voice that did not shake. "These two hired a photographer," my grandmother said, "for a woman they haven't sat with in a year." She let it land. "Hannah cooks my supper every night." The photographer lowered his camera. Then she turned her head, just slightly, toward my father, and she said the rest in a voice meant for him and loud enough for everyone. "I know exactly what you're planning, Glenn, and I'm a great deal less confused than you've told everyone." That was when his smile went. It didn't fall slowly. It was there. And then it was gone, like a light switched off, and underneath it was a face I'd never seen him make in public. Caught, calculating, afraid. He couldn't argue with her. To argue was to admit there was something to argue about, in front of 30 people and a banner that said, "Devoted." So he stood there, with the dead smile and the raised glass, and across the tent, my mother's hand went to her pearls. He reached into his jacket for his phone, half pulled it out, to call someone, to check something, and then he put it back. He told himself, I'm sure, that it didn't matter. that he was still the heir, that a sharp-tongued old woman favoring the help changed nothing. He was wrong, but he had 3 weeks before he'd find out how wrong, and he spent them the way he spent everything, certain. I didn't gloat. I want you to know that. I sat in my grandfather's chair, holding my grandmother's hand, and I felt the whole tent watching the two of us. And what I felt wasn't triumph. It was the strange, quiet relief of finally being seen in a room by the one person who had always seen me, while she still could, out loud, in front of all of them. You came for a photograph. Hannah came for me. The photographer caught the exact second the word devoted became a lie. My grandmother died 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, in her own bed, with the window open. She was lucid to the end. The night before, I sat with her, and she pressed my hand and said, "About the envelope. When you have to, Hannah, not before." Then she slept. And in the morning, the house was very quiet, and I made coffee out of habit before I remembered, and I stood in the kitchen with 2 cups poured, and the steam rising off both of them. I didn't drink either one. The rocking chair sat in the corner. The seat beside her bed was empty. I kept catching the cedar smell and turning toward the chair like she might be in the next room, like the day still had her in it somewhere. There's a kind of mourning where the body keeps doing the small things after the reason for them is gone. My hand set out the little blue dish. My hands counted out pills for a person who wasn't there. I let them. Then I put it all away, 1 pill at a time, back into the bottles, and I washed the second cup and set it in the rack. And the house was so quiet, I could hear the clock in the hall. For 3 days, I kept the window open in her room, because she'd asked me to, and I kept thinking I heard the wheels of her chair on the floor, and every time it was only the house settling. The chair beside hers stayed empty. My father did not stay long at the funeral. He had things to do, he said, paperwork. 3 days after we buried her, my father told me the timing worked out. He said it on the phone, in the flat voice of a man reading a calendar. "Sad week," he said. "But the timing works. We can close on the 6th now." She wasn't a loss to him. She was a date freed up. But while my father was treating her death as a door swinging open, Gail's firm was doing the quiet, lawful thing a death sets in motion. A revocable trust becomes permanent the moment the person who made it dies. The successor trustee steps into her shoes. So they recorded an affidavit of death of trustee, and they prepared the certification a title company would need, and in doing it, they made official, on paper, the answer to the only question that mattered: who controlled the house now? Not Glenn Calloway, me. I don't know exactly how he found out. A call from the title company, probably, asking the successor trustee for documents. And the successor trustee wasn't him. What I do know is that my mother called me, rattled, and put my father on, and his voice had lost its calm. "Successor trustee," he said, that should be me. It should be you. He'd been saying versions of that his whole life. A few days later, something appeared in the county's public records that hadn't been there before. A deed. My grandmother, it claimed, had signed the house over to my father, personally, individually, shortly before she died. She had not. But there it was, recorded, with her name on it. They scheduled the closing for the 6th. So did the truth. 3 days before the closing, Gail called me and told me about the deed. "Somebody recorded a quitclaim deed," she said. "Your grandmother to your father, backdated to before she passed. It's meant to muddy the title and let the sale go through." A pause. "I want you to hear me clearly, Hannah. It's a forgery, and it's going to come apart the second anyone looks at it, but it means somebody just committed a crime to save this deal." I asked her how she knew it would come apart. "Because of where it has to fail," she said. "We'll get into it on the 6th. Be there. Bring nothing, just be there." So on the morning of the 6th of May, I drove to the title company's office downtown. I want to tell you I was calm. Mostly I was. My hands were steady on the wheel. But I'd buried my grandmother less than a month before, and I was driving to the room where my father intended to sell the house she died in, and there was a forged deed with her name on it, sitting in a public file. I gripped the wheel a little harder at the lights. I walked into the closing for the sale of my grandmother's house, and I sat down at a long table with my father across from it. My father was already there, in a good suit, with that confident calm back on his face. My mother sat beside him, quiet, her hands in her lap. Across the table were two people from Harrow Ridge and their attorney, and at the head sat the title officer, with a computer turned toward herself. Gail sat next to me. She didn't reach for a single file. She folded her hands the way I had folded mine over the $8,000, and she waited. "Let's get this signed," my father said, smiling at the title officer. "The house is free and clear." The title officer didn't smile back. She scrolled. Then she stopped scrolling and scrolled back up, slowly, reading something twice. She turned the screen so the table could see it. "Title's in a trust," she said. "The successor trustee is Miss Calloway." She looked at me, and she's sitting right here. My father's smile held by force. "That's a mistake," he said. The Harrow Ridge attorney leaned forward and read the screen for himself. When he sat back, his voice had gone cold and flat, the voice of a man calculating his own exposure. "You sold us authority you never had, Mr. Calloway," he said. His buyer had just become his plaintiff. My father's hand came down on the table. Not a slam, a press, fingers spread, steadying himself. "There's another deed," he said. "She signed the house to me before she died." Trevor, who had come too, who had been standing by the wall the whole time, being quiet and tidy, stepped forward. "It's recorded," Trevor said. "It predates the trust transfer." Gail opened her folder for the first time. "Then it'll match the notary's journal," she said, "and the chain of title. Let's look." She laid 3 things on the table, one at a time. A copy of the recorded deed, the notary's journal, the chain of title. She put her finger on the chain of title first. "The house went into the trust last fall," she said. "After that, your mother didn't own it as a person anymore. The trust did. She couldn't sign it to anyone individually. Only the trust could move it." She slid her finger an inch. "This deed has her signing it as herself. That signature couldn't transfer anything. It's worth less than the paper." She turned to the notary's journal. "The notary on this deed keeps a journal. The state requires it." She tapped a blank line. "There's no entry for it. None. Nothing was notarized that week." My brother Trevor went the color of the tablecloth. My father tried the last door. "She wasn't well," he said. At the end, she was confused. "Somebody got to her?" "No." Gail didn't raise her voice. She slid one more sheet across the table. "Her own attorney met with her alone last fall. There's a certificate that says so. There's a doctor's letter from the same week. And there's a witness who watched her sign, in her right mind, who'll say so under oath." She let it sit. "Her name is Loretta. She lives next door. She signed twice. She couldn't deed what the trust already held." The room went quiet. It was not my father across the table anymore. I want to be honest about that, because it's the moment it changed for me. The man pressing his hand flat on the table to keep it from shaking was Glenn Calloway, a broker who had signed his name to a power of attorney he knew was dead, and then signed it to a buyer, and then, when that failed, put a forgery into a public office. The word father didn't fit him in that room. I stopped using it, even in my own head. Glenn Calloway looked at the 3 papers in front of him. Then he lost the calm. He stood up so fast the chair scraped. He said it was a setup. He said the old woman had been turned against him. He pointed at me and then at Gail, and his voice climbed and cracked. My mother put her hand on his sleeve, and he shook it off. The Harrow Ridge attorney was already speaking quietly into his phone. The title officer was already pulling the forged deed into a separate folder. I didn't say anything. I sat in my chair with my hands folded, and I watched the deal die, and I watched a recorded forgery turn into a criminal referral, and I watched my brother stare at a notary's journal that didn't have his lie in it. It all unspooled from there in the flat language of consequence. The buyer's lawsuit for fraud, the bridge loan with no house behind it, the broker's license that does not survive, signing your name to a deed you forged. My mother, who had described the garden, sitting very still with her hands in her lap, watching the man she'd defended come apart in a room full of strangers and learning, in real time, exactly what she had helped him reach for. None of it needed me to raise my voice. I didn't say anything. The paper did. My father lost the house in the time it takes to print a title report. If you've made it this far with me, then this last part is for you. And I want to ask one thing before I tell it. Wherever you're listening from, if you've ever been the one who stayed, the one they only saw when they needed something carried, tell me about it in the comments. I read everyone, and if this story found you at the right time, subscribe so it can find the next person too. Then stay with me. There's one more thing my grandmother left, and I hadn't opened it yet. In the weeks after, it came apart for them the way Gail said it would, only slower. The developer's lawsuit landed first. Then, the bridge loan, with no house behind it, became a hole my father couldn't climb out of. The forged deed went where forged deeds go, and my brother, Trevor, the tidy one, learned that a title and escrow professional who records a forged instrument does not get to keep his career or stay on the comfortable side of a courtroom. My father's license came up for review. None of these things finished quickly. Some of them aren't finished even now. But they all started, and they all started because of 3 sheets of paper on a long table. My mother called once. She wanted me to understand that she hadn't known about the deed. She probably hadn't. It didn't change the garden she'd described, or the we she had never earned. I didn't pick up the second time. I don't need them to pay. The paperwork already did that. The house was quiet now, and it was mine, and it still smelled like cedar. I opened the envelope on a Thursday, sitting in the rocking chair, with the afternoon light coming in, low and yellow the way it had on all those mornings. The cedar was in the wood under my hands. The house was quiet around me. The good kind of quiet now, the kind that belongs to you. I turned the envelope over, my grandmother's careful hand, for Hannah, what I kept. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, and I'm going to read it to you the way she wrote it, because she gets the last word on this, not me. Hannah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you finally had to open it, which means you waited like I asked. Good girl. I want you to know I saw all of it, the dinners, the pills in the blue dish, the nights you slept with one ear open. I saw who came, and I saw who didn't, and don't you ever let them rewrite that with a photograph. The house is yours. I did it carefully, so no one can take it back, and I'm sorry it had to be so much paper for something so simple. A house is just wood anyway. You were the home. Take care of your grandfather's chair. They'll tell you it's junk. It's worth more than the house. Don't let them throw it out. There was a knock at the door while I was reading, and it was Loretta with a dish. And when she saw the letter in my hand, she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she sat down across from me, the way she'd sat across from my grandmother 1,000 times. She knew exactly what she was doing, Loretta said gently. I signed it myself, right there at that table. She was sharper that day than your whole family put together. My father's aunt called that week too, a great aunt I'd barely spoken to, who had stood in the tent under the gold banner. She'd heard. She wanted me to know she was ashamed she had ever believed them. The photographs, it turned out, had convinced the people they were made for, right up until they didn't. She'd been protecting me the whole time. There was a postscript. I almost missed it, folded at the bottom of the page. P.S. the chair and the 8,000. Both yours. Both always were. Tucked behind the letter was a second envelope, soft with age, my own handwriting on the front from 4 years before. Inside it, untouched, was the money. $8,000. The same $8,000 I had pressed into her hands in that kitchen and told her to hold. The same $8,000 my father had slid across the table to make me disappear, calling it generous, calling it my fair share. It had been my own money the whole time. He had offered me a check for the exact amount my grandmother had been quietly keeping safe for me for 4 years, in an envelope with my own name on it, waiting. He thought he was buying me off. He was handing me back the very thing I'd trusted her to hold, the last of the life I gave up to come and sit at that table by the window. She had kept it because she knew that someday they would try to put a price on me. And she wanted me to see, in my own hand, exactly how small their number was next to what she had been protecting. I had to put the letter down. I read the rest of it standing up by the window because I couldn't do it sitting in his chair. They offered me my own money. She'd kept it safe. Some evenings now, the house fills up. Loretta comes over, a couple of the neighbors. There's a little girl from down the street who has decided the kitchen is hers, and she has discovered the rocking chair. The first time she climbed into it, I felt my whole body go still. That chair, the one no one touched, the one my father wanted to throw out. I almost told her to get down, but my grandmother's voice was in my head, and the cedar smell was in the room, and I understood, finally, that a chair you guard forever isn't being honored. It's being buried. My grandfather built it to be sat in. My grandmother left it to be kept, not embalmed. So I let her rock in it. I sit in the chair beside her now, my grandmother's place, the one she patted that afternoon under the gold banner. The little girl asked me the other day if she could sit closer. "Come sit with me," I told her, and I patted the chair beside me. The house still smells the way it did on the mornings my grandmother was in it, 2 cups of coffee on the table by the window. That turned out to be the only thing I needed to keep. They posed as devoted for one afternoon. She had been devoted for 90 years. And she left the proof where only the loyal would think to look. I patted the chair beside me. For someone else, now.